Thank you, everyone, for attending today. I know it's taking time out of your busy schedule, and hopefully I'll be able to give you guys some good inside information on what Docker is, what containers are, and why they're so important to your customers and to the hosting community. I'm going to start, in a little bit here with some early education, and then we'll move into some business-oriented conversations around why you should be modifying your products and services to offer Docker and containers-based services. So, as Alex said, my name is William Bell, and I'm the Vice President of Products for phoenixNAP. And we're a global IT service provider based out of Phoenix, Arizona, and Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I've been with the company since 2009, and we're helping customers every day find new ways to leverage our infrastructure to deploy different types of container-based systems. And I wanted to help share some of those ideas with you guys as you attack the market. So a little bit of an agenda. I'm going to try to keep it short. I know that you guys are excited to hear what KuberDoc and Cloud Linux have been doing with their products and services. And although the education is a very important baseline for this hosting seminar the series that they're going to be doing, I wanted to make sure and be respectful of your time. So we're going to talk a little bit about why containers are important, not only for you but for your customers. We're going to give a little bit more in-depth view of the application container landscape. We'll talk about a few hosting and service provider use cases, and I'll try to give you some highlights around the different value propositions that you can use to take to your customers. Containers is a little bit of a washy subject, right? So containers have been around for a really long time, and they were mostly geared towards OS virtualization. Sometimes you heard them referred to as lightweight virtualization, but effectively they were, thin structured, effectively wrappers around an OS in order to give a tenant of sorts to an application or to specific customers in the hosting community. What's been mostly moving forward in the containerization and microservices architecture landscape are application containers. And the concept around application containers is an attempt to develop these virtual walls that allow you to quickly package and distribute applications and give you ultimate flexibility and portability for those apps as you deploy them through maybe internally through your QA dev cycles and into production, or maybe between different service providers, and or being able to quickly tear them down and rebuild them, these applications for things like updates and patching. So, they were designed specifically to be content and hardware agnostic, just like a container. I used the graphic there of the containers on a ship, just like a container of goods where you just put whatever will fit inside the container that meets weight structure or whatnot, and then it's the ship is mostly indifferent to what's going on inside that container, we'll talk a little bit more about size and shape of containers and how thin and how bulky you can get, and maybe some education around what's good and what's bad from that perspective. But at the end of the day, all of this was done in an attempt to simplify, automate, and create efficiencies around packaging and distributing your applications and managing applications for a company. So effectively, what we've got here is some common application container systems that we're going to talk about in depth. Most of the talk will be centered around Docker. It has by far the most momentum in the industry right now, but it's important to understand that there are other people working on cool products. There was an exciting announcement today from the CoreOS team. Their production commercial version of Kubernetes was made publicly available, the Tectonic product. And so there's a lot of stuff happening by them with the Rocket container system as well. The Cloud Foundry guys are doing great in the enterprise with their the push from the Pivotal project at VMware, and the Warden container system is kind of the foundation of that. And that's what we see as pretty much the largest distributions of application container systems today. And I think it would be without mentioning, or definitely worth mentioning that there's still a lot of development happening in the OS container systems area, specifically around OpenVZ and their support from the Odin guys. So why do all this, right? Why do businesses attempt to are attempting to convert their applications over to microservices architectures? There's reasons for doing this that are valuable enough to make application containers probably one of the quickest technology shifts that we've seen in the last, maybe ever, but in the last 20 years for sure. Containerization is being adopted at some of the largest enterprises, typically some of the slowest companies to move forward. And I think that these 5 reasons are a small, or maybe a bit of an oversimplification, but for the purposes of this presentation, a very key, important reasons that businesses are considering. So we'll start with the portability aspect. Customers every day are looking for ways to get their applications to the cloud, potentially protect themselves from locking themselves into different PaaS and IaaS platforms. They're looking for quick automation systems, right? They're trying to develop ways to simplify their activities, create efficiencies in their business, and the containers and their orchestration around the containers are helping them get there. And that leads into scalability, right? A properly developed application that is created with microservice architecture concepts in mind really help an application scale, especially as they take advantage of new technologies. They're taking advantage of different new pieces of software design mechanics and different software technologies that allow for application scale out without the troubles of the past, where applications were kind of contained to a specific OS instance, and it was hard to bring them and scale them out horizontally. And all this is leading to performance improvements. And as application can grow and scale and contract, as you can put more on them, more of these containers on a physical bare metal machine without any need for things like hypervisors, it allows for a performance increase. Maybe not as much as people champion and think, and I purposely put performance down at the bottom of 4. I think the performance really has to do with number 3 and the scalability that's provided by the microservice architectures and containerization, and not so much the inherent performance differences of a container-based application versus a traditional application running on hypervisor. And I think that this is probably, the security is probably one of the most important but equally downplayed components of microservice architectures. It's something that has been working through the enterprise community for a while, where they're looking for ways to limit the attack footprint of their operating systems and their applications. And the containers by design help with this just enough OS approach. If you're doing microservice architecture implementations correctly, you're limiting the amount of applications that are on the system in order to feed and create the desired outcome of the application, and removing all the bloatware around that. So I want to dive a little bit more into portability, and this is something that I love this graphic with the works fine in dev ops problem now. I think this is a funny way of describing something that our customers inside their businesses deal with every single day. Applications are developed on laptops, on workstations and cloud services, on different OSs, wherever someone can write code, they're being developed there. But then they're run in a structured environment. and they're run in tightly controlled environments. And all this leads to a problem bringing applications from this dev and test environment into live and into production. And what containers has allowed us to do is effectively bypass that, right? You can package up the application in a manner that allows for smooth and infinite portability between different types of infrastructure as a service or on-premises infrastructure platforms. And I think that what we're finding is that the DevOps teams are actually leading this charge through the organizations, not something where developers are all, just clamoring themselves over wanting to package them better and make, because at the end of the day, a developer just wants their application to run and perform the way that they expect it to and have the desired outcome. They leave these types of concepts up to application services, engineering, DevOps, whatever you want to call it. And those are the guys that have struggled for years and years to make this all work. So some of this is good for you as a provider, as a hoster. Some of this is not so good if you're not helping your customers achieve their business success that they're looking for. But effectively, application containers have allowed your customers and your customer businesses, and maybe yourself if you're developing new intellectual property internally, to avoid provider lock-in, right? As long as you have an OS that supports Docker or Rocket somewhere else, you could bring that application over there and work, and it will work the same way that it worked in say, Amazon. And that's really important because, it's not just about taking your application away from one provider and bringing it to another, but also about having multiple providers, running your application in multiple locations with multiple different providers, but being able to have the same effective systems, the baseline systems all be the same, and or it not matter that they're all the same, right? Depending on what your goals are as a company in terms of systems engineering and system management. But with that comes some complexity, some increased complexity, and typically in the past, running these applications across multiple providers, because of all these differences that can exist from a systems architecture perspective, from a network perspective, can create a lot of overhead, and the application container systems help bypass some of that. So it is something that companies are looking at every single day. I think they're finding that containerization allows them, most of your mid-sized companies and enterprises, the ones that are adopting containers arguably faster than some of your startups, is this kind of nirvana of portability. They can take it from one office to another office, from one data center to another data center, from data center to the cloud. It doesn't really matter. And backing all of this are centralized image repositories that kind of allow you to grab your container images wherever you may be. I think that the density is important to understand, right? With no hypervisor virtualization overhead, you really get to pack containers in the hundreds, if not thousands, per bare metal host. And this is something that can kind of lead towards some profitability on your end. The elimination of a hypervisor for the right type of customer that's ready to kind of package and consume containers as a service can allow you to more efficiently drive revenues through your underlying bare metal systems. I don't believe that it's some massive number where all of a sudden you're going to go from traditional cloud to containers as a service and take 50% revenue per host increase. But maybe you'll see 10 or 15%, and that can be enough to really change a business. The best part about all this is that through these various orchestration engines I'll talk about more in detail later, you can continue this kind of cloud feel. And the KuberDoc guys and the Cloud Linux team are really helping that as well, along with a lot of other vendors. I wanted to talk through a couple of the container orchestration tools that are allowing companies to scale today. The Docker Swarm components, I believe, went 1.0 today as well. So lots of news in the Docker community, but leveraging things like Docker Machine, Docker Compose, Docker Swarm, all the different tools that have been developed around Docker specifically are allowing customers through integration with their development systems, things like Jenkins, are allowing your customer to develop applications more efficiently and scale them out across their infrastructure, wherever that may be. You have the Kubernetes project that's been maintained by Google. They are a little bit more indifferent to the type of container that's being leveraged, although Docker, I think, is still the preferred, and obviously the underlying component of what Igor is going to talk about this afternoon or after my presentation with the KubeDoc components. I mentioned Tectonic earlier. It's a commercial version of Kubernetes that's being developed by CoreOS, and I look forward to a lot of exciting announcements from that side. And I think it will do well with some of the enterprises that are looking for a more supported enterprise-based application. And then I mentioned a couple more. Shipyard, kind of an early version of Docker Container Management, and it's kind of falling out of favor. You've got things like Rancher as well. And then, I brought this in for just a fun anecdote that Spotify actually makes their own container orchestration system called Helios, and it is open source and available for anybody that wants to try it. So there is a difference between leveraging containers internally as a business and what is probably more interesting to the people on this call being a hoster, someone that's helping customers either manage containers or hosting containers for them and providing them as a service. And I mentioned a few of the private CAS offerings that you can look at to bring container as a service to your customers. My friends over here at KuberDoc, obviously, leading that charge, the Magnum project at OpenStack, and Tudum, which was an early hosting company for containers, but has since migrated into being just a container as a service application, software as a service product. And then obviously you have your large public cloud providers. Everyone's playing in the space right now. And it is something that I will mention a little bit later as a potential threat against bringing these types of services to market. But you have a lot to offer. The hosting industry is very resilient, as I found out over my career. And there's a lot that you can offer instead of just being an infrastructure as a service or container as a service system. So how are you going to help, right? I mean, I think a lot of people are interested in that. That's why they've joined this call. They're looking at ways to offer new, exciting products and services to their customers. So I want to kind of talk through some of the logic around what you can do as a business to help your customers and or provide extra value around containers. One place that most people are looking at immediately is, I'm a hoster. I've done dedicated server, migrated to bare metal as a service, and then we did cloud, and we started offering cloud VMs, and maybe I've been doing OS virtualization containers for a long time. How do I get to offering containers as a service to my customers where they can just log into a portal, point, click, deploy application, and there's a container running the application that they want? It's a very honest, probably at least for a time, very successful business model that the more engineering focused hosting companies are very seriously looking at. And I will say that depending on the size of the organization and where your focus has been in the past, if you have been providing things like individual VMs on a monthly basis, OS containers in the past through things like OpenVZ, it might be a good place for you to land. But some hosting companies don't have the engineering expertise. They've got good people, but maybe not in the density necessary to launch a new platform. And I strongly suggest that they take a look at things like container management. Being able to offer a SaaS-based platform to your customers to allow them to board their own bare metal or board their own containers onto the hosting systems that you give them today, onto those dedicated servers, and then manage them themselves. And really, at that point, you're providing a value-add service around the infrastructure that you provide. I think that the biggest question that you have to ask yourself is, if you obtain that customer that you are driving for and you're trying to service through containers as a service, can you provide them with the scale and stability that they're going to want from you? And that's going to be a tough nut to crack for smaller hosting companies that may be early to market with container platforms, and in this crazy market attract some larger businesses that are looking to maximize a cost or something that you're able to provide in terms of extra support, etc. But you're going to have to provide them with massive scale out, and that can be a problem financially, and it can be a problem from a support perspective. But I do believe that a lot of you are up to that. So I highly recommend looking at making sure that you've got that scale and stability built out into your CaaS platform if you go that route. And I think the last one was just added as a bit of tongue-in-cheek, right? I believe that there's no question at this point that this is a lasting technology shift. And if you are not finding ways to provide your customers with some type of value around containers, you may find yourself on the outside looking in as we move over the next 5 years in the hosting market. So a lot of you have decided that you're going to go out, you're going to compete with the big guys, you're going to provide containers as a service. I want to make sure that you can take the time to help differentiate your products and services against them. If you try to compete on price alone, and you just go out and you say, I'm going to create a container as a service, and I'm going to match Amazon, Google, Microsoft, price for price, and we're just going to drive compute as a service, I think you'll probably have not as much success as you hope for. I believe that there is opportunity for you to provide hybrid infrastructures, where if you can find a way to provide an extra value-add service maybe for the most production-sensitive components of a customer's application, and somehow tie that into the pure public cloud providers through hybrid infrastructure, I think you can find some customers that might be interested in that. If you can provide managed services around the applications that are being deployed to containers, I think that will still be a tremendous success. Whether it's on one of the large public cloud providers, or if it's doing it yourself on your own container hosting platform. We talked about the price side. And if you can find ways to specialize in the exceedingly difficult components, the extremely large designs, architecture, complex environments, all those things will help you differentiate. And as you take your services to market, you can find ways to have success against just the pure infrastructure as a service. And I do consider containers just infrastructure as a service. I've got a couple logos down there on the bottom, and they'll kind of lead into the next slide. Hopefully most of you are these guys. Maybe you've seen the containers and the ships, the Maersk and Hanjin shipping companies. And these guys are massive, right? They're out there making, tens of billions of dollars a year in revenue, and competing with them is difficult. If you said today, I want to go and build my own shipping company, and I want to do everything top to bottom, competing with them can be difficult. But there are ways to help, and the logos at the bottom you may not have ever heard of. And these are large shipping services companies, right? They work with the guys like Hanjin and Maersk every single day, and they're still billion-dollar companies. And they've made a great living doing things like trucking management, dock, operations, things like that. They're not shipping companies, and they don't have to be, but they're finding ways to help out the shipping companies, help out the customers that are using the shipping company, and provide a value-added service. And that's kind of what I'm talking about when I use the word bring them the tools, right? There are so many ways to help customers that are looking to adopt containers and microservice architectures that isn't hosting them specifically. I know that's the premise of these talks, and a lot of you are here to learn how to do that. But I do want you to highly consider what's best for your business. And we talked through some of these before: the managed services, the acquisition and licensing of private CAS software to help your hosting customers deploy containers. The one that is overlooked, things like object storage services, whether that's one of the S3 compatible products out there, whether that's Swift, whether that's Ceph. A lot of you are looking at Ceph. There's a ton of integration between things like SVN and Jenkins, private Docker registries, and Kubernetes. They all leverage object storage services, a very centralized part of these containers as service platforms and containers themselves. And finally, at the minimum, training your staff to make sure that they understand container technologies enough to provide the support that you've and your customers have come to want, and the reason that they're with you today, and maybe focus there instead of becoming the next container as a service system. All of this is still in its infancy, but that in no way means that it is small and unproven technology. I'd say that we're getting to the point where it's kind of graduating into awkward teenager years from infancy, and that's an absolute forensic pace from even 2 years ago, right? When all of this stuff was just kind of starting to scratch the surface. There's so many things that you need to do to familiarize yourselves with containers. A lot of you have already gone there. You're engineering-focused organizations, sole proprietorships. You've spent time as a software developer. You've spent time as a systems engineer, and you've already started working on the basic concepts that we've talked about today. But for the rest of you, I hope that this was helpful in understanding a little bit of the landscape. And I think the next few sessions with Igor and his team are really going to kind of drive some of that home for you. There's so much to do, but you have to be careful. You can't just jump to market with, I've got containers, come buy them. You have to look at your customer base, you have to look at where you want to be in the market, and you have to provide the services that those customers expect. And if that isn't just pure hosting, you have to be able to do more. You have, if you advise for security in your hosting business, you have to advise for security in your container hosting business. And that is going to be different, right? You're going to have so many different things to address. So make sure that you are you're talking to your customers about containers and how they can help their businesses, and that your support teams are helping every single day as best as they absolutely can. And that's the way that you're going to not only retain your business, but actually help it grow in this container crazy market.